Wednesday Open Studio. Welcome back, everyone. How's everyone doing? Happy end of April. If you're watching this live or premiered, happy whatever day it is if you're not. Alrighty then. Yeah, we're just trucking on. We gotta find that roof. So we did kind of these things right down in here last week. Finished up with that one. It might be the best way to go is to, like, I'm confused, not confused, but I'm not 100% sure about what these are right here. So again, it's easier to start in a building that I know on the reference, and then just kind of, keep going from there. So, and then one building leads to another, and that's how it all works. Yeah. Okay, so back to it. Back to our stuff about art stuff. A lot of these, like we were talking about with color, I can't do the topic justice without doing it just a whole video on it, really. You know what I mean? Just talking about stuff like color, for instance. Just talking about color and its importance or color theory without visuals is not ideal. So tonight's topic is the same thing. So perspective, we're talking about the way that parallel lines that are moving away from us converge. So basically, the farther away something gets, the smaller it gets. And we know this. We see this all the time. What am I looking at? I lost my place again. Not with this. No, I'm looking up here, but that's not what I want. This guy. Oh, okay. I'm good. So a painting like this, because we're so far away from these buildings, they don't show a whole ton of perspective. They do have it going on, and it's important to kind of keep that in mind. And this is where the kind of thing is, if you learn the basics about it and really know it well, you'll start applying it even when it's in a subtle way, like with these guys here. All the buildings in this painting. Now, obviously, the paintings in the front, like down below, down here, are closer than the paintings that are higher up on this painting. So they're going to be smaller as they move up. Tokyo, again, we talked about way back. Tokyo is an old city, and it was kind of laid out before they were thinking about giant cities. So you get a lot of windy kind of intersecting roads where, a city that was built a lot later, and they kind of focused on blocks, like parallel lines and blocks. You see a lot more perspective in something like that. Like, you could see that, or, in any instance where you're standing in front of two parallel lines, like on a straight road or railroad tracks. Now, the importance of it is big. If you're going for realism and you ignore perspective, your stuff will always look wrong. And it's hard to explain, how it looks wrong sometimes, because, sometimes it's just a matter of, like this very slight kind of change in an angle that will set something in the right spot. But if it's not right, it tends to look like it's, especially if you're trying to be realistic, it tends to look like it's wonky, like a building, for instance, wouldn't be built right. It's really important to get that down. Perspective works with everything. It works with the human body. If you get into any kind of foreshortening, where what that is like you're looking down. Like if you're looking down your arm, your arm looks shorter than it really is. If your eyes are right on your skin, you know what I mean, and you're looking down your arm, it's foreshortened. Or if someone points at you, their arm looks shorter because it's aimed right at you, that kind of thing. But there's perspective involved in that as well. Even though the perspective is a lot less because the object is a lot closer to you and a lot smaller, it's still there, So getting it down and understanding it is important. All right, I can fix this now. Even though I did this last week for you guys, I'm filming this episode right after the last one, so I still had to wait for it to dry. But I can clean up that little wet area of paint. And this is just the X-Acto knife. I should use X-Acto knife more for highlights, but you know what it is it's not that I don't want to, I just simply forget. The other thing, believe it or not, it's harder for me to control the X-Acto knife than it is a paintbrush, because it makes such a definitive line. You know, as I'm scratching, it makes a really like what you do is exactly what's translated, because it's a blade and all that. And that can get out of control a little bit. You know, I like the push and pull a little bit of the paintbrush sometimes. All right. So again, like these buildings, you can't really see the perspective in them so much as you can feel it. You know, it's like the back side of this building up here should be a little bit smaller than the front of this building here, very slightly. And sometimes if a building just isn't sitting right, you know what I mean? Like it just doesn't feel right. Just simply by just shaving off a little of that roof. Well, I'll do it here because this does actually feel like it's doing that. So if I take the black here, I don't want a full strength black. Let's go with really dark gray. Okay. So this building here, if it feels like, you know, it's like moving in the wrong direction, meaning the roof is almost like peeling up on this back corner because it's wider back here than it is in the front. Now you ignore this little bump out on the side, just really the rectangle that's right here. So if I go in and just kind of shave that off a little bit, and this paint was too wet, let's see if I can save that. Nope. Let's do that again. That was a beautiful what could go wrong moment. So I'm going to purposely push this out a little bit so it's back to where it was in the wrong position. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to let that dry a little bit. So there we go. Yeah, the back is now wider than the front. So we'll let that dry and then we'll get back to that. But again, if I don't correct that and I have it happen all over this painting, it'll really throw off the painting. It'll make things feel like I said, unsettled. Now we talked about breaking the rules. This is a perfect example of that. Say I wanted a really unsettled feel, like I wanted this to be kind of, like I said, just like something not right. If I was to play with the perspective and say leave that the way it is, and actually push all of them in that way, where they're actually getting bigger as they move away, the angles, it'll give this thing an unsettled feel. The trick is you have to know what you're doing, because if you push that too far, it'll just look like you don't know how to deal with perspective at all. But the idea is you break it or you bend it just enough that it makes it uncomfortable, that it's difficult to see, and then you leave it there, and it's extremely powerful. And with these buildings are very small, it's almost not worth doing. But in a bigger painting, like if you have a cube that that should have perspective in it moving away from you, but you kind of flare it out a little bit purposefully, it can have a really interesting feeling to it. So again, know the rules so you can break them if you want to. All right, let's try that again with less mistakes. So I'm going to make sure this paint isn't uber wet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of pull in the top corner by dropping that angle a little bit. And this is still too wet. What am I doing? I mean, it worked and everything, but heck, man, come on. There we go. So now that roof sits a little bit nicer. It's the back side of it sits down where it should, where when it was flared out, it felt like it was like peeling up like a piece of paper. And again, the trick to all this stuff, the color theory, all these fundamentals, is you want to get them down so that they're second nature. You don't want to be, I don't want to seem like you're doing your painting and you're just going through this checklist, and then within each checklist of each fundamental you have a checklist for each one of those, and then steps that you have to do. It's not like that. It's again, I talk a lot about the way we use language. It's the same thing, when you're talking, you're not going through all the rules of, language and things like that. You've learned them enough that you are fluent they're in the background of what you're talking about, and you just kind of put your sentences together and go. So that's kind of what the same thing is with art. The same thing with music too. No musician, no good musician is saying, okay, now I'm going to play this scale right now, or I'm going to do this drum rudiment right now, or I'm going to count, like I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You've done all the practicing. You've got it all down to the point of it's second nature to you, and you're just playing. You're just talking. You're just telling a story. That kind of thing. The same thing with art. You want to get it to that level. You want to be so comfortable with the fundamental that you're not. It's coming second nature to you. You're feeling it more than you're applying it, I guess. You apply it because you feel it, not because you have a checklist somewhere. So the reason why I bring that up is because that's the daunting part when you're learning it. You're like, how am I ever going to get all this down? There's so much to learn, But you end up just kind of applying as you go and letting one thing build on another, and take your wins when you do and your losses when you do, and that's how it all comes together. And again, hopefully it's fun for you. That's the whole point. That it's fun to learn these things and get them down, and go on to the next one, and still apply the ones you learned before, and you hopefully should be having a good time doing it. If you're not, you may want to reevaluate, what you're doing in general. Yay, see what I mean? Like, I was messing around with all this stuff, and I actually got back to where I should, and I was in the right spot. Yeah, this reducer is taking a little getting used to, because I'm doing the same thing I always do with it. However, it's feeling very thin, which is good. Like I said, it's not a major deal. It's just going to be a matter of me figuring out, how the new stuff works. I'm going to jump up to this building, since now I know where that building is and what it looks like. Got that one. That's kind of a lighter gray. I'm going to use the white for this because it's, like I said, it's thin. So as I put this coat on, I know it's going to be like semi-transparent because it's so thin. So it'll act as my gray. That's going to be that building. Oh yeah, I'm getting it. So a quick little note, like for the jumping back to perspective. So for me, I'll give you an example of how it becomes second nature after a while. So as I'm painting in these rectangles, like for that building right there, when I painted that rectangle in, I'm painting this rectangle, but I'm also using my peripheral vision to look at all this stuff down here and these. So as I'm painting in this rectangle, I'm using those angles down there to set where this one's going to be. And that's, I don't even think about that, because you just work on it so much that you just commit it to second nature, All right, that's good. So this is the stuff that's going on in here. Oh, it's not that bad. It's just, that's why I'm having a hard time with it, because it's not overly, the stuff that's going on right in here, it's not like crazy pronounced. It's just like this gray roof right here, this long one. Some other junk like this guy. Yay. Good, this will be a decent chunk today. And the darker one over there, so we'll grab some darker gray for that. to the front corner of this guy right here. Same thing here. This angle that I'm putting in right now, I'm getting a feel for all this stuff that's around me. Now, perspective without getting too far into it, I'm going to do a little... Oh, I wish I had some transparent paper. But I don't. So I'm going to use this copy from something else. All right, so pencil, yay. All right, so for perspective for this, again, things are, getting smaller as they move away. So for instance, you're standing here, there's a road, and it, like that. Standing here, there's a road, and as it gets farther away, it gets smaller. Perspective, right? With this painting here, though, there's a little bit different feel to it. So here's the overall painting. That's the whole painting, the whole panel right there. The perspective for this one is going like this. So, and then of course, the river is going through it here, but the perspective lines are like this in this painting. So as I'm doing this, and when I pull this away, you'll kind of be able to get a feel for that. So if you look at, see if I can get this on camera. Yeah. And again, you're at an angle, which isn't good because it'll skew the perspective from the actual being head on, which you'll see it in the end when I show the full view. But these buildings down here have this kind of angle right now. Let's see if I can get the pencil in there. Have this kind of angle right now. But as you move across, they switch up to this angle. And then as they get farther up, they're going to move to this angle. So keeping that in mind will give this whole thing this feeling of everything moving away the way it should. Again, keep that in mind. I know it's tough to see because you're at such a harsh angle on the camera, it screws up the perspective on the panel for you guys. But you'll be able to see that now if you look, at the end, which you'll be able to do in about 13 minutes. So let's jump back to this and we'll keep going. Yeah, I love perspective. I think it's really neat. Again, I grew up with a dad that was an engineer and worked out of the house as a draftsman, and so I would watch him create the most amazing drawings. These are isometric drawings, and then they would be put into perspective to give people an idea of whatever object they were designing would look like in real life. And it was just really fascinating. I was just like a hair's breadth away from going into that, to being a draftsman instead of an artist. I took a drafting class in high school, and just because I needed some extra credits, and I knew it would be something I could do. I had no idea how much I was going to enjoy it. And what was great was the instructor was fantastic in that I took the first year of it, and then I couldn't fit the second year into my schedule. And he said, "Well, here's what we're going to do. You're going to take the first class, because the first year class fit into my schedule, but the second year class was at a different time, and I couldn't take it. So he said, you're going to take the first year class again, but we're going to give you credit for the second year class, and I'm going to give you all the material on your own." And it was really, really cool. I really enjoyed it, and I ate it up. So that little stretch of high school, I really thought a lot about, what it looked like to not go to school for art, which I was lined up to do, and go for drafting. And now the reason why I didn't is because, if I remember right, that happened my senior year. So I was already on the path to go to art school and be a graphic designer or painter or whatever. So it was maybe not unfortunately, but it was easy to make the decision not to jump into drafting, because I didn't have a lot of the other classes. They were taking all the math classes and everything, and at that point I hadn't been following that path. So, but having been exposed to it so much with my dad, and having all those drafting books and stuff, and it just all made sense to me. It's funny how sometimes your life, yeah, like I said, you gotta listen to what the story is that's being told to you. Sometimes that's hard. A lot of times that's hard. I don't know what I would have done. Like now that I think about it, because we always think about what ifs, not in a bad way, but like that, maybe that opportunity that got away, that you let slip away, or like the drafting thing for me, like what my life would have looked like had I made that jump. I certainly would have been happy, because I would have painted on the side. I knew I would have kept doing that. Yeah, would I've thought about what it would have been like to be an artist? Definitely. However, I don't know, like I love cars, so I wonder that if I got into drafting, if I would have got into the automotive industry. Just neat to think about, like, where things would have taken you. But I have no regrets. I have no regrets. This is working out swimmingly. The reason why I say that is because as I put in a line, and then I put in that line, and then like I look down at the next building and say, okay, if that line's in the right spot, then that should intersect this building and it does, and that's a good feeling. That means that I'm not screwing up, which is a great feeling, actually. So my drafting teacher, Mr. Barrick was his name, and he was also my driving instructor. When I was going to high school, you took driver's ed in high school from the high school, which was great. And because I had him for classes anyway during that time, we would often go get donuts instead of, go to the normal places we would practice driving. So we'd get coffee and donuts and stuff. I mean, I would drive there, but it was pretty fun. It was pretty fun having, a teacher that you already knew, and there were a bunch of us in the car. I think 2 other people took that same class. But yeah, it was fun going to get donuts and hanging out with him and doing all that. Yeah, he was one of those teachers. He was really good. Again, I think about how close, and I remember thinking about it. I remember, like, I know I can do this. I not only do I enjoy they used to have these in the class, and my dad had a book like this. They would give you um, drafting problems, essentially. Like you'd have these 2 views of an object, and then you had to kind of put it all together so that you could draw the object in 3-dimensional, like a 3-dimensional way. And it wasn't just like you think about it and do it. There's like you do lines and transfer lines and everything, and it was really neat. And I used to love the problems. Everyone else was like, why do we have to do this? This is crazy. And I was like, yeah, give me another one. So my dad had a book of similar things. They would be specific, problems, and you had to work them out. And I used to love doing them just on my own, which is kind of weird. But, to my dad's credit, I'm sure he would have loved it if I followed in his footsteps, and become an engineer and a draftsman and everything. But he never pushed it. He never said, come on, man, you got to do this. Never, never, never. And, I love him for it. All right, what am I doing? That's that big gray building up here. We are burning this thing down. Really? Oh, you know what? Before I get too far, we should probably catch this, whatever's going on up here. And I know I'm avoiding it because it's weird. Just weird stuff. So that's that. All right, so just gray stuff. They're roofs, but they're all flat and they're all the same. Look like the same, almost the same height. Oh, I think there's a road there. There's a road? Yeah, there is. What do you know? It's getting hard to see what's going on up in the smaller areas. There's a road right here. Yeah. With all these roofs that are butted up against it. I got to get the airbrush going. I'll do that in just a second because I want to get the airbrush before I do too much of this. Again, I don't want to do a whole bunch of this and then, forget that I had to airbrush some stuff. Good. Yeah, let's break out the airbrush. What do we got? It's 3 minutes left. Perfect. Actually, I don't have to break it out. It's already broken out. No, actually. Let me use this one. I do have the Infinity with reduced paint in it, but it's the thicker version of it, the 1:5 mix, and that's going to be too strong for what I want to do here. Again, here I want to just kind of get there we go. Get some of the building, the bases of these buildings kind of locked in. Yeah, like that. So for areas like up in here where it's like kind of just the roofs and they're kind of plugged in there, in no real way, I can add a little bit of airbrushing to kind of soften that up too. Where else? This one here needed it. So again, I'm not even looking at the reference for this. I'm just picking the bottoms of the buildings and I'm giving them a little bit of hit. And I'll give you a little sneak preview. Like one of the things that I do at the end of these paintings is to use a little bit of atmospheric perspective to kind of close out the perspective idea. There are basically two different kinds of perspective when it comes to art. There's that perspective that we talked about where, converging lines or parallel lines look like they're converging as they move away. But there's also something called atmospheric perspective. And what that says, or what it implies, is that as things get farther away from us, they become almost desaturated in color because of the atmosphere between us. So atmosphere, while it's transparent for the most part, it does have some stuff in it, the gas, the nitrogen and oxygen, and the dust and all that fun stuff. So as you get farther away, it causes things to look more dull or blue. You think about mountains in the distance, they look blue because of the sky between you and the mountain. So that's atmospheric perspective. And what's going to happen with this painting is I'm going to introduce that as well. And it's fun with the airbrush because you have so much control over how subtle you can do that. And again, it's not going to make any sense until I actually show it to you at the end. But in the end, there'll be this like really light mist of white that I'll kind of spray over the whole thing. Especially with this painting, because this painting, was taken, the photograph was taken early in the morning, or in the morning when it was kind of still foggy, misty, and so that's gonna add to this whole painting. So even though this whole area that I'm painting right now is super sharp, it won't be in the end. It'll have this very subtle, like unifying white mist kind of over it. And I know that sounds like it's going to be way more subtle than I made it just sound. I mean, I made it sound like it's going to be like foggy, like a foggy day. It's not like that, but. And again, it's one of those things like we talked about with like kind of screwing with the perspective. If you do it just in the most subtle way, it's going to have a really big impact. But if you overdo it, it's going to look like you don't know what you're doing. Same thing with that. It's just there enough that it unifies everything together. All right, there we go. And perfect timing. So here is what the whole thing looks like. And again, look at that bottom lower left-hand corner and picture that 45-degree angle of those buildings. But as we move up in the painting, see how the buildings like near the center of that section we just finished, how the angle of those almost feels like it's flattened out a little bit. Then that perspective is what's going to give this painting a bunch of depth. Did I make that up? No, it's really in the photograph. But if I wasn't paying attention to it, it would have been easy to keep all those buildings at the same angle. And then what that does is it flattens out your painting. It doesn't feel like it moves into real space, which is fun. So bottom line is perspective is important. The other bottom line is you need to feed the algorithm for me, kids. Hit that like and subscribe for me. Make me a happy camper. And that would be wonderful. If you'd like to support us in a more financial way, you can do what these lovely people have done. And that will get you 10% discount on everything in my store and early access to Time Lapse Tuesday. All right. So for Steve Leahy and Through Lachlan's Eyes, I will catch you guys next week. Have a great one.